What's going on, good people? Welcome to another episode of Better with Paul. Today, as always, should I say, it's always special, right? And I always have a different reason for why I consider it to be special, but today is special because of this, right? Because I see my man Ricardo. That's why it's special. I see my sis Marsha. That's why it's special. LinkedIn, I see you. Periscope, I see you. There you go, Queen on Periscope. I see who else? Oh no, it's going so fast. I can't. By the way, the LinkedIn user on LinkedIn, I love that because I don't know who you are. I don't see your profile, but still, what's up? What's going on? Miranda, I see you on LinkedIn. By the way, I love that LinkedIn is tied in. Well, LinkedIn is really popping today. There you go. All right, I see it. Everybody's here. Okay. So now, there it is. I see you. Okay, so now, this is going to be one of those episodes that you will replay. I can guarantee you will replay that. You know how we like to start. Make sure that you are sharing the video right now. Make sure that you spread the love. And while you're sharing the video, I want to start with this, okay? So I want to show you something that is very, very important. Right there. Now, this is very, very, very important, what I'm about to say. Very, very important, all right? So this past week, my wife and I were debating on, so we're now in London. We were debating on moving back to the US, at least for a little while. We love London. We love the UK. We love being in Europe, but we live in a flat, right? And by the way, you know, I'm so European now. I don't even call it an apartment. We live in a flat, right? But we live in a flat, and our boys, we live in central London. They really don't have a yard where they can go play, and so they're missing their friends. So we were debating on moving back to the US, right? We were looking at the pros and cons. Literally, on the day that we had sat down to come up with this pro-con list, George Floyd is murdered, right? He's murdered. There's no other way to describe it. He was murdered. Now, if you don't live in the US, because we have a massive audience outside of the US, right? So shout out to everybody around the world who's watching this. But if you don't live in the United States, or you don't follow what's happening with the United States and, should I say, law enforcement, this incident is not an anomaly. This incident, this is repetitive behavior. Okay, and so hearing about George Floyd, what it did in the murder, is it made us really think about the fact that right now in the United States, the killing by a police officer, right, is the number 6 cause of death for a Black man or child. So think about that for a second. The number 6 cause of death, more than diabetes, more than more than thousands of causes of death. The number 6 cause of death in the United States for a Black man or child, because children are being killed as well, is at the hands of a police officer. Now, think about this, right? You think about how the police are in place to protect and serve, to protect lives. This is the mantra of police. And on top of it, the police are, they're an arm of government. Okay, so government is there to not just provide a structure for any country, but it's there to protect the people of that country, all people of that country. But here you have the government now killing Black men and children to such a high magnitude that out of every 100,000 Black men and boys in the United States, 100 will be killed by a police officer. Think about that. 100 will be killed. So as someone who is a Black man, for someone who is the parent of 2 Black boys, this is highly concerning, okay? Highly concerning. Then on top of it, you just think, let me just roll with this for a second if I could, because if you don't live in the United States, or if you have not kept up with what's happening, this may feel like, okay, well, Paul, I hear what you're saying, but but is this really going to be an issue going forward in the future? And I say, in order to understand the future, you have to look at the past. The United States government has only existed at the expense of Black men. Okay, this is not Paul with theory. This is me coming to you with raw fact. The United States government has only built itself, grown, and continued to exist at the expense of Black men and boys. Now, of all Black people, should I say, the literally at the expense of all Black people, but disproportionately Black men and boys. Now, you don't need a history lesson, but let's just go back real quick. Like, the U.S. government was founded in 1789. Okay, 1789, the U.S. government was founded, and it was only founded off of a tax base that came from entrepreneurs, right? So business owners who owned enslaved labor, right? And it was the enslaved labor that was creating products and services, cotton, rice, etc. And it was those taxes that created the U.S. government, literally. So literally, it was enslaved labor, it was Black labor that created the U.S. government. And you don't even have to go back hundreds of years like that. Just go back maybe 100 years. Let's look at 100 years. That's 1920, 21, right? 1920, what's happening? You have Tulsa, Oklahoma, perhaps the most prosperous Black community that existed in modern history. Now, for those of you that really don't know your history, you should know that there were Black dynasties like Mansa Musa's dynasty in Great Mali, right, that were more significant in terms of economic power than any civilization that's ever walked this earth. But at that time, 1920s, you had one of the most prosperous Black communities in the world. What happened? Completely bombed out. By who? Because keep in mind, when I say bombed out, literally planes flew overhead and bombed out the community. Who was doing that? Well, behind it, as we now go back and we understand it, were government officials, police officers, etc., at the expense of Black people, right? Go back not even 100 years, go back 10 years ago. What's happening 10 years ago? Oscar Grant, right? Oakland. You remember the story. Oscar Grant, face down, gets shot in the back by a police officer 10 years ago. Go back 1 year ago to 2019, 235 Black men and boys killed in 1 year, by police officers. Go back 1 week. This man right here, George Floyd, assassinated before our eyes. Now, you ask me, and actually let me ask you, and it doesn't matter what color you are, what would you do if you were me? What would you do if you had 2 young, innocent Black boys, ages 6 and 9? What would you do? Right? You know, I could go on and on and on and on and on and on, but this is what I want to say about this. One is, I think it's very important, and this is actually the last point I'm going to make on this, is I think it's very important for us to understand that social and political power follows economic power. Social and political power follows economic power. So what are you going to do? What am I going to do? Basically, we all need to do something. If you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. And I fully believe that. So everyone who has seen one broadcast about George Floyd, all right? Everyone, and that even if you live in Dubai right now, and this is the first time you're hearing about George Floyd, now you know, right? So now you're either going to be part of the problem or you're going to be part of the solution. Let me tell you about one solution, potential solution for all of us, no matter what color, no matter what nationality, where you are in the geography, is I believe that economic power drives political and social power. I truly believe this. Now, what we are talking about, what we talk about every time we show up to Better with Paul, is how you could better build your business, better build your brand, right? I firmly believe that if we, all of us, can create more sustainable businesses, I'm talking about real businesses with real revenue, right? And real income, that economic power will then drive more political and social power. I firmly believe this. And just point an example, look at Jack Dorsey real quick, right? Jack Dorsey is the CEO of Twitter. Who is he beefing with right now? He's literally in beef with the president of the United States. Now, how does someone have enough power to basically debate and argue and beef, basically battle with the leader of either the first or second most powerful country in the world, depending on what you think about China? How does he have that? Jack Dorsey can do that because he has incredible economic power, which then gives him political and social power. My friends, this is where we need to be focused, right? Now, granted, we need to be focused everywhere, but I think that disproportionately, there needs to be a lot of energy put towards economic empowerment. And that's exactly what we do here. And I'm going to stop because I'll move in a direction that we don't want to go in right now. So let me drop this. Guys. One is, before we get started, make sure you're on this, right? This is the recap of what we do. If you saw, I dropped the ebook on everybody last week. I've been working on the update for Monday, which is going to be incredible. You remember when we talked about content and the different levels of content? That's going to drop on Monday. I'm dropping full recaps here, full additional resources. So the recap of today's session is going to be here. So make sure that you're here, all right? The next bit is, make sure you know about this, all right? I made a mistake last time, so I want to apologize for the mistake. Last time I put a lowercase j in here for Jamaica 2021. You could only get to the link, the bit.ly link, by going to capital J, Jamaica 2021. This is going to be our retreat. We're already planning it. Already we had 150 people sign up to be on this wait list. So this is going to be an incredible event. Make sure you are on this wait list. We are starting the planning right now for Jamaica 2021. And that is it. That is it, guys. All right. Let's talk about today. All right. Today, we're talking about how to start not just any old podcast, but how to start a successful, and then in parentheses, I put profitable podcast. And I did that in particular because I think success is relative, right? We can all determine, what we could peg what we think is success. But bottom line is, we all know what profitability is. So today I want to talk about success/profitability in a podcast. Now, I personally have been on the fence of publishing a full-on podcast for over a year. A matter of fact, you could probably go back and say I've been on the fence for about 5 years or so. I'm truly going to use this conversation as my compass to lead me as to, should I be starting or should I not be starting a podcast right now? And in order to lead me and to lead you, I brought 3 people that I highly respect in the podcast space. These were, once again, the first 3 people I thought about, first 3 people I reached out to. They all said that they were willing to come on here and share everything they know about podcasting. So this is going to be an incredible, incredible session. I want you all to make sure that you put your comments in right now, because once the guests come, I'm going to be scrolling through the comments. So make sure that you get your comments in. All right. Now, let's get going. All right, let's get going. So the first guest that we're going to bring to the stage is someone who I truly, without hesitation, consider to be a queen. She is a queen. A matter of fact, I had no idea that she was watching the last session that we did. I didn't even see her in the comments. If I did, I would have shut down everything and said, oh my gosh, look who's here. But I went back, watched the replay, saw her in the comments. And I want to say this is Patrice Washington that I'm talking about. I don't know how long I've known Patrice. Like it's been years and years and years. I feel like it's been between 5 and 10 years that I've known Patrice. And I want to tell you something about her that to me is incredibly special, is that I've gone to, so Patrice and I have seen each other at various events, right? Where most of these events we've been speaking, right? So we've both been on, one of the speakers among the speaker lineup at these events. So I'll see her like backstage at these events. Like, oh, Patrice, what's up, right? Now, in most of the events that I've gone to where Patrice has been speaking, I have been what I consider to be the junior speaker. You always have the like any kind of festival lineup. You've got like Prince, right? That comes in, he's the headliner, and then you got everybody else, right? So I was, the last two in particular, right? I remember I'm not the headliner. I'm just a speaker. Patrice is really like, she's the headliner. Now, when I'm backstage and I see Patrice, she always made me feel like I was the headliner. Always. Like she always made me feel in how in the excitement and how she greeted me and in the words that she would say and how she would talk about how the crowd is ready. Like I just felt good, right? I just felt good. And I think that it's important that we give folks their flowers, right? And that I just want to say that was an affirming feeling that I truly appreciated then and I appreciate now. And I think that's a quality that not everyone has, but it's a quality that Patrice Washington has. Then on top of that, she has like one of the best podcasts in the world. So that's why she's here. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. This is Patrice Washington. Patrice.
That was so kind of you. That was kind. I mean, you were the headliner to me.
See, there you go. To you, only to Patrice. Patrice, honestly, thank you very much. It was really cool, as I mentioned to you in the voice note too, and it was really cool that you were in the comments. Thanks so much for doing this. By the way, everyone, Patrice is even here whilst she has her husband handling her community. So she's sacrificed her community to come over to ours. So everybody, make sure you give Patrice a big round of applause. Patrice, let's get right down to it. Real quick. Actually, I've got a question lined up for you, but just give everybody just a quick overview of when you started podcasting, how many podcasts you've done, and a little bit of the accolades within the podcasting space, just so everybody knows who we're dealing with.
Okay, sure. So I started podcasting in 2017. As you know, Paul, I actually came from radio. So I've been known as America's Money Maven since 2010. In 2014, I joined the Steve Harvey Show as the Money Maven of the Steve Harvey Show, where I hosted a weekly personal finance segment called Real Money Answers. And I would answer people's personal finance questions each and every week. And in 2016, 2017, I really started to shift because my voice was growing and I knew that I had gotten outside the money box. As a personal finance expert, what I truly believe is that wealth is so much more than money and material possessions. I believe in my heart of hearts in the original definition of wealth, which is the condition of well-being. And that was a conversation that I didn't feel like I could have in 3 minutes on the radio every week. And so the opportunity to start a podcast came up in 2017, and I pulled it together in 3 weeks, literally 3 weeks, pulled it together. I went to Podcast Movement, which is one of the largest podcasting conferences in the country. in 2017 with no podcast, no cover art, no editor, no show notes, no idea what to do. Set my intentions, met everyone I needed there, and I launched about 2 weeks later. And now in 2020, last year, I had the pleasure of going back to Podcast Movement as the opening keynote speaker. I've done about 100 and I think I'm right at about 150 episodes at this point, and have been nominated for awards. And mostly what I'm really proud of is I've built a community of people who I call purpose chasers, who identify with the 6 pillars that I teach. And that was the biggest thing for me with the podcast was I wanted a platform where I could control the narrative without producers jumping in and saying, I don't know if that'll work. I wanted a safe space to teach finance the way that I wanted to teach it.
Gotcha. What I love most about that is how quickly you started the podcast. It was like you got the idea. 1 week later, you're making things happen, right? So let's stay there for a second. What do you believe? Now that was I'm sorry, that was 2017 you mentioned.
I started September 2017.
2017. Okay. So thinking about today and the climate today, right? What do you think are the 3 most important considerations someone needs to make if they're thinking about jumping into the podcasting space?
Well, one of the things that I commented when you were talking on Monday is that most people think that creating a podcast is all about having the best mic. And I think the most important thing is to be clear on what your message is. Like, what is the big promise for the audience? What is it that you want them to take away? How should they feel? What do you want them to go and do? I was more concerned with making sure that my voice was genuine and authentic and that I could really clearly articulate what this message was than I was with cover art and the mic. To this day, I use the same mic that I used 4 or 5 years ago. Honestly, I still haven't upgraded the mic. So that's one important consideration. I think the second thing is most people burn out very quickly with a podcast because they're not really clear on their proprietary method, if you will. So my proprietary method is what I call the 6 pillars of wealth. And so I was very intentional before the podcast even launched. I had a girlfriend come over and help me dive into this, but we listed out the 6 pillars. And then I listed out what are all the things that I want the woman who listens to my podcast to know, to feel. How do I want her to live her life? What are the best practices, rituals she can put in place? And I literally thought through 200 podcast topics before I ever cracked the mic. I knew what I wanted to teach her. To this day, like I said, I'm at 150 episodes. I still have not exhausted the original list that I made. But what it does is keep you clear on the focus. Like, what is the intention of the podcast? What is it supposed to do? And I think that's where people get confused. It's like, oh, I have an idea. Let me crack the mic. And there's not a plan for how this person is supposed to live, who that ideal person, like, what are they really supposed to feel and take away? And that was what I focused on more than the stuff I think people busy themselves with.
Yeah, I love it. It's interesting. You got a lot of people that are that listen to your podcast that are in the comments right now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so good stuff, Patrice. Thank you. You're coming back, obviously, but thanks so much. I tell you what, I have some questions for you though that are of concern about my potential podcast. So I'm gonna need your counseling in just a second.
I'll be here.
All right, cool. All right, everybody say goodbye to Patrice. There she goes. I tell you guys, today is going to be one of those. All right, it's going to be one of those. Now, coming next is someone that I not only highly respect, but I have a huge level of appreciation for. Let me tell you why. All right. So the person who's coming next is part of a podcast studio called Switch and Board Podcast Studio in Washington, D.C., although they do remote podcasting services. And this is the first podcast studio, the only podcast studio in the United States that I went to start recording my podcast. The owner of the studio is a good friend of mine, Selchuk. And so this was the only podcast. This is really where, I started to get my podcasting chops. I have recorded dozens, maybe 20 plus episodes of a podcast that I've yet to publish, but I did it at this podcast studio. And so I have a huge level of appreciation and gratitude for this podcast studio. But the key reason why I wanted to have Caitlin on, right, who's with Switch and Board Podcast Studio, is that she's seeing what's happening really on the ground with a lot of entrepreneurs who are attempting to start podcasts, right? They're working with a lot of people who are, trying to figure out, should I start? I don't know. Should I start? And so I think that she can give us a really good insight on what the general market looks like. And then in particular, she can help us break down equipment, the need for production, workflow, etc. So without further ado, coming from Washington, D.C., big round of applause for Caitlin OConnell. Caitlin, what's up?
Hi, Paul. Thanks so much.
It is an honor to have you. So thank you. And I saw Selchuk right when we were doing the sound check. But once again, I've got to thank you guys. Thank you for everything you've done for me.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having us on. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, good deal. All right, so now, Caitlin, here's the question that everybody asks, and Patrice just alluded to it, right? Mm-hmm. And that is this whole notion of, I can't start my podcast unless I have the right equipment, right? And honestly, I was one of those. I was like, I need to have the right sound. Selchuk, can we go back and re-edit that? Like, I wanted it to be perfect. But then you have another group of people who will just pick up their iPhone and just get going. But what I'd love to hear from you is, what is your opinion on the importance, or should I even say the role, that high production quality plays in a successful podcast, right? In a profitable podcast? Because clearly, sound is important, right? But how important is the editing? How important is all of those little elements? So break down for us, how important is equipment? How important is production quality?
Well, I wish there was a simple answer to this question, but like everything in production, it's complicated. So, Patrice alluded to the fact that your content is paramount. If you have the top end studio for hire in your payroll and you're going there every day and making a really high quality production, it doesn't matter if your content is garbage. It doesn't matter if you don't know who you are, what your strengths are, and what you're trying to give your audience. Quality won't matter in that case. But on the other hand, as you just said, people let equipment become the obstacle to their dream. So people dream about making a podcast, they design their art and do all the fun stuff, they get their music set up, but then they say, I can't start without my equipment. And that's just an obstacle that they're letting get in their way. If you're set, if you have your idea, you know who you are, you know who your audience is, and you have a message, you shouldn't let anything get in your way. And right now, especially during this pandemic, people are extending a lot of grace to podcasts at a lower quality. And I think that is really indicative of the need for content, the need for niche content, and the fact that podcasts aren't going anywhere. It's still a growing industry. It continues to grow every day. That said, if you already have an audience, you already have a platform, you already have an online presence, you already have fans, those people are going to be forgiving. They're going to be so excited to see you on a new platform that they're going to show up for you. But if you're starting from scratch, you have to remember that first impressions matter. If you don't know me and you tune into my episode, I'm a complete stranger, and the quality is really low, you're probably not going to stick around. So you need to know who's listening. You need to know if they're going to be forgiving of your quality, and you just need to know quite clearly where you're placed in what I call the podcast verse is. So what we recommend is that if you're starting from scratch, get a mic. Please don't podcast with your AirPods. It doesn't, please don't. And you can always upgrade as you go. And that's really common. A lot of people start on a budget and then increase as they're able to. And, 90% of podcasts don't get past the 10th episode because people underestimate how much work is involved. There's planning, there's post-production, like you said, editing, there's addition of music, there's scheduling guests. It's a lot of work. Yeah. And that's why having a production team behind you to keep you accountable to your deadlines and to help you stay on top of all the tasks helps a lot. So until you realize how much you're getting yourself into, we don't recommend investing in really high-end quality equipment. Come to the studio, test it out one time, see how it feels, see if it's something you can get a hang of, and then see if you're willing to really invest in the equipment. Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, you can start small and grow as your audience grows.
Wow. 90% of podcasts don't make it beyond the 10th episode?
No, it's a lot of work, as you know, especially if you're a perfectionist. Again, perfectionism is an obstacle, and we don't recommend it. Nothing's going to be perfect, and you can't keep editing forever. At some point, you just have to release.
There you go. Well, you just said it, Caitlin. That's why I'll never have a podcast, right there. I can never have a podcast now.
If you have anything to say about it, you're going to have a podcast, because we love the work we did with you, and we are so excited to show it one day when you're ready.
There you go. There you go. All right. Well, Caitlin, good stuff. We're going to come back. When we come back, one question I definitely will ask you is, what mic do you suggest? But we'll come back on that one. So everybody, there's Caitlin, DMV representing. All right, there we go. My podcast studio. That's my podcast studio, y'all. All right. Next up is my man, Paul, which, by the way, his name is Paul. So you already know Paul is going to be epic, right? And Paul's from Jamaica. So you already know Paul is going to be epic to the 10th degree. Now, let me tell you one quick thing about Paul. All right. I don't even know how long ago I met Paul, but I was at an event. I was at a press conference. It was actually a press conference for launching some of the school rebuild programs that I'm doing in Jamaica. And I remember being, I think, at the hotel and thinking that I could squeeze in an interview before I went to this press conference. So I'm sorry. Actually, let me back up. Paul saw that I was going to be at this press conference. He messaged me. He's like, "Hey, my name's Paul. I've got this podcast. I really want to interview you." And I was like, "Okay, I think we could do this. Just come down to the hotel and we'll make it happen." So he came down to the hotel. I don't even know where in Jamaica he came from, right? I don't know how he got there, right, to the hotel. But he came, and I couldn't do the interview, right? Because I don't know what happened, but I couldn't do the interview. So I had to go to the press conference, and I was thinking, oh man, he was such a nice guy. I feel terrible. Paul then came to the press conference, right? And then I was like, okay, I think I could do this interview at the press conference, right after, like, done. Let me just make it happen. And then there were so many questions that happened at the press conference. I couldn't do it. There was this dinner that was happening afterwards. So I couldn't do it. So I was like, sorry, like, I can't do it, right? And so Paul said, no. When will you be available? I'm just going to wait for you. And long story, I think I went out to a dinner. I did all kinds of stuff, came back to the hotel late that evening. Paul was there. He was ready. He had his mic. He had the same level of enthusiasm that he had when he had saw me earlier that morning, probably. And it just goes to show you, A, how tenacious you have to be when you are hosting a podcast, but it also goes to show you how incredible a person Paul is. And that's why it's an honor to have my man, Paul, coming to us. Paul, you remember that?
Yeah, like it was yesterday. That was I was running on fumes and passion only at that point. Like, it was a crazy time.
Yeah. But I'm telling you, your energy level was on top, man. It was on top. Yeah.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate you even doing it and not just like blowing it off. And it was a really great conversation. Trust me. Like, just after what we went through together at that point, like the conversation we had was like next level. So,
yeah. we had gone through some things. All right. So here's the big reason why I wanted to have you on, Paul. One is, I love your work as a podcast host, but what I love is how you've now moved to the space of helping people to monetize their podcasts, and not just monetize. Your whole goal is 6 figures of monetization in a podcast.
Yeah.
So there will be a lot of questions for you throughout this, but let's just start with, for those of us thinking of launching a podcast, and we know we want to monetize, we want it to be profitable. What are some of the top considerations we should be making now? What should we be thinking about going into creating a profitable podcast?
Yeah. Well, there are 2 things to think about. And one is like, when you're starting your podcast, what is your level of influence at this point? Like, do you already have an audience? Is your audience already big? Like, if you're in the position of like Patrice, you can start your podcast already monetized, right? But if you are starting out, like kind of what I did, where I didn't know anybody when I was starting out, I had no audience, no nothing, you kind of have to start with building momentum. And that's going to be the huge thing, because there are many ways to monetize, but they're all going to be based on what level of influence you have, what's the size of what the size of your audience is. So definitely. So let's break that down a bit. So there are a couple ways to monetize. One is you can monetize with donations. So if you have an entertainment-based podcast, there are a couple of podcasts like that. There's one that I listened to a lot back in the day called Myths and Legends. They talk about, they just read through different myths and they write it, they read it. It's really amazing. They have their own Patreon system set up that helps them to continue to make it. And then the bigger they grow, the bigger that Patreon grows. So you can go that way. The other option is with sponsorship. So someone in like Patrice's case, for example, and she already has an audience, she can go out there and she can start shopping. Whether she's going to go to a brand and saying, hey, brand, sponsor my show, so that I can already have this huge audience. As you can see, I'm coming from TV or wherever, or already radio. I can do that. They can negotiate something, and you can get a good 6-figure deal just by doing that. And we can talk about what that looks like in terms of how do you then tell people what the size of the audience is to get sponsorship. So there's that. Also, I would be crazy not to talk about elephant in the room. I see people already talking about it, which is the Joe Rogan deal, right? Platforms themselves are entering the space, right? And they're saying, we want to get people locked in exclusive, people who already have brand, who already bring influence, already have power. We want those eyeballs exclusively on our platform, because if our platform grows, we can do bigger things. And if you saw, they paid Joe Rogan $100 million, or we don't really know what the exact figure is, but their stock price went up $5 billion, right? So everybody's now aware. Everybody in that space is now aware of what the power is, and so you now have ability to go out there and negotiate something that wasn't available before. Okay, so if you already have an audience, the field is open for where you can go to. But I want to talk to the people who don't already have an audience and what that can look like for people, because there are ways to monetize, and the way that I think beats sponsorship, it beats donations, is by you building your personal brand. Right, so you, Paul, this would be perfect for you. Patrice, perfect for you. People in that space who you already have a personal brand, or if you're building a personal brand, because you can create programs and you can sell those programs to your audience through your podcast, and that is what I've seen personally work for a lot of entrepreneurs in the space who are experts. They start with an idea, they build an audience up, and then they say to the audience, "Here's something that I have, and here's something that I can sell." And it all starts from being very clear on who that audience is. Gotcha.
So Paul, I mean, we'll get into it, because I see a lot of actually money questions, and a lot of people who didn't know about the Joe Rogan deal are like, "Oh my God, $100 million, right, for that?" But do you honestly believe that someone who is starting today with no community, no platform, no following, right, starting today, 0 followers, right? Mm-hmm. Do you honestly believe that within a year they could be profitable in their podcast?
Absolutely. 100%.
100%. Okay.
Yeah. Like we see it happen every day. It's all about how you build your audience. It's all about, because I talk to a lot of coaches, a lot of podcasters, and they run into a couple common problems. And one problem is, they kind of just jumped in. They did this whole thing. They built something, but they're not seeing the growth. So they're excited to talk about something, but they're not seeing the growth. And when we peel back the layers about what's happening, what's wrong, they weren't very clear on who their audience is.
Yeah.
When they get really clear on who their audience is, then we still start to see things take off, and then the monetization problems are a thing of the past.
Yeah, what's fascinating is Patrice mentioned knowing who your audience is, your avatar. Then Caitlin came in and said it's about knowing your avatar, what type of quality they want. You're talking about the same thing. For everybody who watches Better with Paul, you know how important the avatar is, right? So thank you very much, Paul. You're coming right back. Okay, you're coming right back. All right. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I told you the panel is fire, right? Remember when I was talking last week about how do you rate the panel on a scale from 1 to 10, my curation? I'm giving myself a 10 already on the curation. I don't care what anybody says. This is a 10 panel right here. But we're about to bring them back right now. Couple things right before we bring them back. Make sure you're getting your questions in. I've already seen a lot of questions. I'm going to go back. We're going to do rapid fire on the questions. And then that's it. Let's bring everybody back. All right. So we had Paul. We had Caitlin. We had Patrice. Here we go. All right, guys. Let's start with this question. By the way, this is my question. All right. So this is the most important question of all questions, right? But no, I have been concerned as of late that the number of people entering the podcasting space is now through the roof. So there's now lots of competition. Like there's endless competition, that being one. Secondly, is I'm looking at the consumption, and during this whole lockdown situation, I've seen that the consumption patterns have fluctuated to the point where a lot of podcasts are actually down, with the exception of, people talking about COVID, et cetera, right? So my question is just simply, is today, this week, is this a good time, or should we be more so plotting to enter the podcasting space in a few weeks or in a month when the quote unquote, we go back to what life used to be? What do you think about that? When should we be starting?
I think the best time to start is right now. Like the best time to start was 1 year ago. The second best time to start is right now. There's an opportunity here. The opportunity is that there are people who are at home now who weren't at home before with that time, and they want something to consume. They want some good news. They want some information. And why I fell in love with podcasting is in the first place, and why it's so powerful, is because you get an opportunity to learn things that you didn't learn in school. Like, for example, listen to Dr. Rhonda Patrick's podcast. You listen to all these people's podcasts, Michael Port's podcast, and you're able to learn about the depths of health, the depths of public speaking. That's things that you don't find on an average day. You don't happen to stumble into a PhD expert and talk to them about the depths of health, how you can learn epigenetics, but you can learn that through a podcast. And so that's very powerful. And your perspective is something that can shine through once you peel back the layers of all the people who are influencing you, all the podcasts that you learn, and you actually talk from your true self, both your expertise and your personality. You can stand out as a podcaster.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I'd love to build on what you said, because Stitcher just released their annual report on podcasting. And although there was an initial drop in listenership during the pandemic because commuting changed, since then, numbers have steadily gone up. And it's like nothing has happened. Podcasts are growing. They are always growing. And I would argue that the best time to start a podcast was when you first heard of podcasts. And if you didn't do it then now is still a good time. And we don't believe that there is such a thing as competition in podcasts. Because as Paul was just saying, your lens, your experience, your perspective is always going to be different. If I want to start a podcast about becoming better, and I want to call it Better with Caitlin, I'm not doing what Paul is doing right now. I'm not doing Better with Paul because I can't, because I'm different. And it's always that way with podcasting. There's room for every voice.
I love this. I believe the same thing. Definitely do it now. Podcasting is one of the few platforms I've ever participated in where people are actually very complimentary and willing to support each other. When I was starting the podcast, Paul, you were actually one of my first guests. And one of the things that I thought about were just who are the other brands, who are the other people who have podcasts as well that were where it was complimentary, because podcast listeners are podcast listeners, right? So in other places, people will be like, well, that's my competition. In podcasting, it's like, let's do a pod swap. You come on my show, I send my folks to your show. It's one of the best places to actually build camaraderie. And something else that I just wanted to say is, an audience of one is still an audience. Mm-hmm. And I think that people get consumed with, but I don't have 1 million downloads, or what if I don't get to 500,000 downloads, or what if, when you think about that plan for where this podcast can go. And to Paul's point about how it can create 6 figures. Do you need 1 million listeners to create products and programs that can get you to that 6-figure point? You probably don't. You know, if you sell something for $1,000, you need 100 people in a year, right? So if you're looking at it like that, I never approached the podcast like I need 1 million people to do anything. When I was thinking about starting the podcast, the first thing I wanted to do, because I had shifted, I had a pivot in the content that I was even sharing. I did immediately monetize, but kind of differently. I was in the middle of a brand partnership and I was like, and I have this podcast. And they're like, really? What does that cost? And I was like, $3,500. And it worked out. But my first objective was do a year of consistent content that you know is amazing. Go all in on creating consistent content that is high value. My second objective then was to create community around that content. So I did try the donation based. I had a Patreon account, and I wanted to bring community, the people who were purpose chasers listing all over the world. How do you all now connect to each other? If you're in a space where maybe the people around you are not thinking the way that I'm teaching you to think right now and look at things. And my last objective was to cash in. It wasn't the first thing I thought about. And I think that if you are only thinking about coming into podcasting to make money, there's a lot of easier ways that you can probably make money. Like Caitlin was saying, this is work. This is not easy. And there's a reason that many people don't get past 10 episodes. It's not a joke. But it is the very best thing out of all the things, television, radio, author, all the things that I've done. Podcasting by far has been the best thing for me.
Wow. I love it. Y'all are preaching. Let's jump right into rapid fire questions from the audience. This is a prevalent one. Whoever feels like taking it, right, grab it. So here's the first one. Which is the best podcast host that you would recommend?
I can give my pick for Libsyn. I mean, my pick is Libsyn.
Mm-hmm. We use Libsyn too. I don't know that there is one best. They're all doing the same thing. Yeah. We prefer Libsyn.
And I use Podbean. And I've actually been on a couple since we started. I mean, they all pretty much do the same things. For me, I don't edit the podcast or anything. I never got into the editing game, and I don't personally upload it myself, but I was looking for something that was easy enough for a virtual assistant to do for me. So yeah.
All right. This is good. You know, it's interesting. I just saw one about narrowing. Well, this is technically it. Let's go to this one. How do you identify when you truly have wide demographics, how to narrow without eliminating too many? So I think this almost goes back to the avatar. So let me remix this question, right? So now you know your perspective, right? You want to do better with Caitlin, right? That's your your perspective, right? You believe you know who the avatar is. Now you've already picked out your host, okay? The podcasting host. What's the next step? Is it, you all talked about the importance of sound. So is it to get that mic? Is that the next step in the process? And if so, what mic should we get?
Well, that really depends. I mean, if you're going to be doing it from home, there's some great USB mics you can get. We always recommend Rode NT USB mic. It's a good price point. It works. I don't know.
I don't even know the name of my mic, to be honest. I plug it in and I go.
Yeah, there are two really good mics that I would recommend for a really good price point just starting out. I know you guys probably heard these names before. One is the Audio-Technica ATR 2100. That might be out of stock because it goes off like sells like hotcakes. But the one I'm using right now, which is also really good, equally, it's a good USB mic, is the Samson Q2U. SAMSON Q2U. Really good podcast mics under $100. Very versatile. You can plug it into a mixer or directly into your laptop or computer.
Yeah, Audio-Technica also has some other good products. Another USB one, I think it's the 2500. It works pretty well.
Okay. Now, still, you know, it's interesting. There's still a lot of questions on sound, right? So I just want to respect the questions on sound. This will be our last one. What do you think is the minimum amount that needs to be spent on podcasting equipment to achieve that clear sound? And then also, I noticed that now that distant interviews are popular, I often hear that the host's sound is fairly good, but the person they're interviewing sounds like crap. Like, it sounds terrible. So how do we mitigate that?
There's so much focus on equipment, and I think that's a bit misguided, because yes, you should have quality equipment. And if you're having a call-in guest, ask them not to use their AirPods, please. But beyond that, it's also your environment. Are you podcasting next to a window? Do you have street noise coming in? Do you need to you can buy like a blind that'll go around you that'll help muffle any exterior noise. And in editing, are you remastering the sound? There's a lot of ways to mitigate the environmental noises without having to go all in on equipment.
Okay, super. Let's then keep going. I like this one from Anthony from LinkedIn. He's thinking about starting a podcast with a partner. Now, is that a wise decision? Like, should we have partners? Should it just be solo? Should it be like, how do we decide on our partner and then also the format of our show? Should we go 30 minutes? Should we go an hour? Should we be comical? Like, how do we determine format and partners?
Yeah, I see that. It's an important question. It can go either. One thing you need to realize is that your podcast is an asset, right? And that means that at some point, if you're looking at a podcast, you want it to grow. At some point, it's going to grow. And when it grows, are you comfortable with it? With the split that you guys are putting in? And so that goes also into each of your levels of commitment to the show. Because if you're always there on time, showing up ready to do everything, your partner is not, it's going to be difficult to break out of that. I've worked with podcasters who are coming up here. It's always a nightmare. So you really have to think about, it's just like taking on a business partner. You need to think about what your level of commitment is with that person, what your split is, and what that would mean as you grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very, very intimate relationship. It's like a business. It's like a marriage. You need to know that that's someone you can trust and who has the exact same level of commitment that you have, and that you're dividing the labor evenly. It also really depends on what type of show you're doing. If you're doing an interview show with two people, that can be too many voices, too many cooks in the kitchen. If you're doing a show that requires more conversation and banter, then you might want to have someone that you have a great rapport with on board with you.
Can I say this too about formatting? So I hired a podcast coach for those 2-3 weeks that I had that supported me. And I have to say, there's a fine line between inspiration and imitation. So I know that when you're thinking about starting a podcast, you're probably listening to a million podcasts. What we tend to do is like, oh, I like their intro. I like how they did that segment. I like how they did this ending. And then you can maybe end up with a circus of a show, right? Because there's just too many different things. And those people created those shows in the ways that they did because it spoke to their personality and it spoke to their audience. And so you have to be really careful with format to think through, again, from the top, what do you want the experience to be for the user? What do you want the experience to be? Because eventually your plan is to cash in on this community that you built, right? You want to eventually monetize it. And so there's a couple things that came up for me when I was in that process. I thought I needed to have the voice of God intro me, right? And I got this thing made on Fiverr, and he was like, Patrice Washington, this whole thing. And Vernon Ross, my coach, he was like, what is that? Do that. And I was like, I don't know. I thought that's what I needed to do. That's what I've heard on other podcasts. He's like, does that feel authentic to you? I was like, no, it doesn't. He said that it's not going to feel authentic to them. So I scrapped it, right? There's a reason I don't do mid-rolls, which is drop advertisements inside the middle. I do them in the front or at the end. But again, I had to find what worked for me in terms of format and what I felt like would resonate with the audience that I serve. And so just thinking about that, don't go out and try to imitate, everything. You can get ideas, but then you still have to bring it back and filter it through the lens of, is this what I want to do consistently? Because you also don't want to change up every other day because your audience needs consistency. There's no such thing as sometimes I post on Tuesday mornings, and then sometimes it's Wednesday night, and then sometimes it's Friday morning. Like, I believe you need to have consistency in the quality of the content, consistency in when it launches, consistency all around, because people, that's what they're depending on. You become a part as a podcaster. I know that for many people, I'm a part of their Thursday morning routine.
Yeah.
And the minute I don't show up, they're tagging me, they're DMing me, they're like, hey, hello, what's going on? And so you want to create something that you can do consistently.
So on that note of doing it consistently, what is at minimum we should be coming out? And what if some of us feel as if we have the capacity to drop 5 or 6 or 7 episodes in a week? What is the optimal frequency that we should be publishing? And then another question attached to that is, should we be publishing on all platforms? Like, should we try to show up on Spotify and iTunes and Stitcher and YouTube? Like, should it be everywhere, or is the move to try to double down on one platform?
Everywhere you can publish. Don't hold back. If you have something you want to release it everywhere. And in terms of frequency, it depends on what kind of content you're dropping. And we work with a lot of podcasters who, like you said, feel like they have the capacity to drop 5 episodes a week. But feeling like you have the capacity for it is different from actually producing 5 episodes a week. If you're doing 7 minutes, updates or daily meditations, then you can drop 1 a day, fine, especially if you have a team supporting you. But if you're going to do an hour-long podcast daily, you better not have another job or a family or another hobby. So you have to know yourself. And when you talk about feeling what your capacity is, you have to know that's your capacity, because consistency is key. Just like Patrice said, it has to be consistent.
Yeah. If you have the capacity, like if you know that you can do more, test it out. Like, do more. Just build up a batch of episodes before you launch. And then when you launch, you can drip it out whatever frequency you want to do it. Do it at least weekly, though. Like, I know that for myself, when I started to interview, I wanted to see how many interviews I could do in a day. And by the end of the 4th interview in one day, I was like, I quit the podcast. I can't do it anymore. I'm done. Mm-hmm. Because I know that 4 is my limit. Like, I can't do more than 4 interviews. So know what your capacity is, and if you want to do it as often as possible, because the more you do, the more momentum that you build, so for sure. But if it's at the risk of, like you said, your family, if it's risk at your health, don't do that. But do it at least weekly. That's my take.
I mean, I think one of the only podcasts that can get away with 1 a year is Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. And this guy's doing it for the love of history. And he researches and produces 1 4-hour-long podcast about once a year, but he already has a following. He's not trying to gain momentum. He's just doing it for the love of it. If that's you, go for it.
Yeah. Can I say, Caitlin, that's my favorite podcast.
I love that podcast.
Yeah. Hardcore History.
I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, that's my favorite. So let me ask this, okay? What about incorporating video? Because this is something that is, a lot of people, I believe, use it to help to promote. But now people are just watching, full videos on YouTube. And so my question is twofold. One is, should we be incorporating video into our podcasts? And then secondly, what's the best strategy? Because I've heard some people say, oh, you shouldn't show everybody the whole video. Just cut up in small clips. So what's your opinion on the use of video?
Well, I mean, a huge part of the Joe Rogan deal with Spotify was the fact that he does video, and Spotify's trying to pivot to including video on their platform. So it's definitely something to keep in mind as the future of podcasting, but not everyone's video ready. It adds another layer of work to your podcasting job, and you need to be fully aware of that. The equipment's going to be increased, the editing's going to be increased, and it's not necessary. But like I was saying earlier, publish on every platform. If you have something ready to go on YouTube, publish on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't know about video. I just started actually, because I record on Zoom when I interview a guest. And so we just now started to take the video of the guest to use in our promos. And that seems to be going really well, a little bit better than the audiograms. People are just engaging and interacting with that more. But one of the reasons that I love podcasting is that I don't have to feel done up. I can literally get up in the middle of the night with an idea and crust in my eyes and a bonnet on, Paul, and I can get it done. And the audience is none the wiser about me having PJs and fuzzy slippers on. And that again, when I talk about consistency, it has to feel good lifestyle wise. Like it has to feel good. Personally, I can't go to a studio, like I'm like a homebody. So besides speaking, I don't really leave. And if I needed to leave in order to podcast, I probably wouldn't podcast.
Wow.
So you're going to add video, depending on, what your deal is. I like to be done up, but I'm not going to be done up every week. So, you have to think through that too.
Yeah, which is fair, All right, let's do this. We have 10 minutes. I want to spend the next 10 minutes on making money, right? This is about money. The last 10 minutes is about money. So tell me this. Let's say that you're watching today and you now are inspired, right? You're ready to get out there, make it happen, once a week podcast. And you have no audience. What would you recommend? What would you all recommend as the number one thing that person can do to monetize? Like, so what should the product, what should the service be? What should the ask be? How do we, the number one thing we can do to make money if we're starting from, ground level one?
Well, I'll say for me, because yes, I did have an audience, but my podcast was a completely different concept. So one thing that I say that anybody can do though, is not get caught up in thinking that they need to have all these numbers in order to get people to advertise. When I first started, I was trying to go through these podcast advertising agencies, and they would say, well, you don't have enough downloads, you don't have enough impressions, or we can do this, but it'll be, $15 an ad. And I just knew that I was more valuable than that. Like I didn't want to do ads about mattress companies because it didn't speak to my audience or what my topic was. And on top of that, I didn't want to do the work of creating the ad, having their feedback, editing the ad again for $15. I just couldn't make it make sense. And I said to myself, why not just offer it to my audience, right? I knew that in my audience, I have a bunch of entrepreneurs who need a platform and a place to also share what they're doing. So why not create my own ad packages that I sell and offer it to the people who are listening? If you have a desire to talk to people who are like us, right? And you meet and your product, your service, whatever it is you want to promote actually speaks to one of my 6 pillars, then apply. And if you get approved, then I'll work out an ad package with you. And I started from $500 up to $1,900 for ads. And I've sold it to people in the audience. So it helped my audience build their audience and sell their products and programs without needing to be approved by some outside force.
Yeah. I'd say definitely if you're just starting out, start know what, do you have a product? Like, if you're using your personal brand, do you have a product in mind to sell to your audience? Are you an expert on something? Is there something about your expertise that you can deliver over a podcast? Identify what your offer is, where it's a $500 offer, $37 offer, $5K offer, and then begin to use that as a call to action in your show. Also, begin delivering content around that topic. Like, make your podcast about your expertise and deliver. I have this framework where I call it the four episode authority building arc. And with that, you're breaking down what are the 3 to 5 steps that you can take a customer through from wherever they are to where you want them to go, where they want to go, and then deliver that over 4 or 5 episodes. And over that time, you're building up with that audience your authority. Let them know that you know what you're talking about, you have the expertise, and you also have a product in mind that will help them to get where they want to get to. So if you're just starting out, I'd say know what that is and begin getting that out there.
Okay, and I know this will be a hard one, but realistically, if we're trying to budget, right, and we're starting at ground level 1, right, how much do you think we could make podcasting once a week? And then also, I know audience numbers are not critical in this formula, which I love that, Patrice, by the way, is sell the ads to the audience, right? But what are the number of downloads that that once we're receiving, we know we should be making X. Like, for example, I often hear people say, all right, at 10,000 downloads off of advertising, you could be making X and Y, right? So the question is, I don't even know what the question is, but the question though is, at what point or at how many downloads can we be making what money along a year? And I know it will range, but just what is that fluctuation?
Yeah, I think it's not about numbers. It's about, can you demonstrate influence, right? If you know that you can make a call to action that says, hey, find me on, follow me on Instagram, people follow on Instagram, download this thing, people download this thing. If you can demonstrate influence, you can monetize and you can get a good, like, it's not really about numbers. Like, I've seen people with $800 per episode to even, like grossly under $10,000 per episode making six figures. So it's not about like numbers, but what influence can you command with your audience? What rapport do you have with them?
Yeah, knowing your audience. I know we've said it before, and I just have to say it again. If you're not engaging with your audience around every single episode and getting to know what they're interested, what kind of ads they want to see, like Patrice figured out how they want to share their own voices on your show, then you're going to be missing out on potential revenue because you just might be marketing the wrong product and not making the kind of money that you need.
Yeah. And I think that you can start as soon as you start to, like Caitlin said, engage with the audience and see what they want. I think a lot of times we come into this with, I have this program, I have this product, and this is what you're going to get. But if you reverse that and talk to the audience and ask them what they want to see, I knew that my audience wanted, I serve mostly high achieving women, right? I knew that they wanted a safe space to not be judged for feeling the way they felt about finances. Yes, I have a great job, but I'm not fulfilled. Why am I not fulfilled? Some of these other areas are, but they don't feel comfortable saying that to friends and family who are like, you made it, so be quiet, right? So I created a mastermind based on what they said they wanted, because I talked to them in the DMs, I talk to them in the comments, I go back and forth with people. I think you get so consumed with, I want more and more people, that you forget to talk to the people you already have. Because if you talk to them, again, with 14 women in my first mastermind, that was an almost $100,000 launch, right? It's not about having a million people. It's about knowing the people that you already serve and being committed to serving them like over and over and over again. If the commitment is to money, you're always going to lose. I'm not saying that money doesn't come, but that can't be the commitment. The tagline of our podcast is chase purpose, not money.
Yeah.
So what is purpose behind what you're doing? Once you're clear on that, then you can set your priorities.
Facts.
Podcast listeners are the most loyal people in the entire world, but they're only going to be as loyal as you are to them. So like Patrice was saying, if you ignore them and go after the money, then they're going to ignore you and go after the money too.
That's true. All right. So I want you all to help out. This could be our final question here before I bring you back for the one-on-ones. I want you to help out our tribe member right here. Okay. They're getting ready to start a podcast on Sunday. So here's the question, right? What are 3 things that you suggest they do if they are preparing to start this podcast in terms of promoting it, right? What are 3 things that they could do? And the reason why I want to ask this question is because I've seen a lot of other questions come about that are talking about, how do I begin to engage my audience or my community about my podcast? Or one gentleman said, I had a podcast, but now, it's now defunct, but I want to bring it back. I want to re-engage. So from a promotional standpoint, what are 3 things that could be done this week for this person to help to promote this podcast? Yeah,
from my perspective, the 3 things would be, 1, start getting on other podcasts, get in touch with people who are in the autism space, start talking to them, building a relationship with them, get spots on their podcast to talk about what you're doing, talk about your family, talk about your podcast that's coming up. That's one thing. Two is, podcasting is a relationship type thing. It's grown by relationships. So if you're not promoting it, talking to your friends and family, your customers, your biggest supporters, everybody, and letting them know that you have this thing coming up, here's how it could benefit them. Sign up, join you on the journey. Like you're going to be missing out. So it's all about relationships, what you share with your audience and what your audience shares with other people. So if you can get that engine started, you're going to be on a really, really good ride. And thirdly, definitely have some SEO going. Whether that means you have a website up and you're putting your podcast on the website to capture those people who are searching in Google for autism content, they'll stumble upon your podcast. And as you grow your podcast and put episodes out there, it's gonna grow and grow even more. You're gonna go up and up on the ranking because you're putting out really relevant content to the people who are searching for that.
Mm-hmm. And the content that you're putting in there really matters. I think Paul mentioned this in a previous response, is that podcast topic looks really interesting and really special. But don't forget that podcaster appears to be an expert in a field, not just by being a parent, but also by their professional experience. This is an expert voice. And so don't forget to self-promote. Don't just say, I've got a podcast, please listen. Say, I'm an expert and I have something to say, and you're going to want to hear it.
And my tip would be to tell your story. I think that we really negate the power of storytelling. What we like to do is just say, buy my thing, subscribe to my thing. If anyone saw the Madam C.J. Walker movie that was on Netflix, the series, if you remember the scene where she was trying to sell the hair grease, when she kept going, buy my grease, no one paid attention. Right. And that's the same as you saying, subscribe for my podcast. You have to make me feel why should I? You have to enroll me in the vision for the podcast, enroll me in the story, tell me backstory. Don't just tell me I have an autistic son. Help me feel what that feels like. Help me understand what I'm going to gain by listening to this, how you're going to help shift my perspective, how you're going to give me tools and resources. But don't tell the story, help us feel the story, because people connect with the emotion and the feeling more than they do with your direction of do this thing. Call to actions are wonderful, but don't give me a call to action until you've enrolled me in the vision.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that I didn't realize how many people are planning on starting a podcast. Like, it's fascinating. Everyone in here, not everyone, but a lot of people are saying, I'm really thinking about doing this. Let me end on that note. Should everyone start a podcast? So, Caitlin, I'll never forget what you just said. Like, the first time you should start a podcast is when you heard a podcast. So let's say that somebody crawled from under a rock today and they heard podcast. What's that? and now they've heard. Should everyone, or not everyone, should every entrepreneur and anyone thinking about building their brand, should everyone have a podcast? I want to end on that. Should everyone have a podcast? If so, why? One reason. If so, if not, why not? And that'll be our last one.
Honestly, no. I don't think so. I don't think podcasting is right for everyone. Some people don't have the voice for it. Some people are unable to exhibit their charisma and their brand over the audio medium. Some people don't have time or don't have the resources to produce something quality. And if you don't. There are other ways to get your message out. You need to love podcasting in order to be a podcaster. And if you don't waste your time. Focus on your actual skills.
Yeah. If you think that you have a story to tell, a perspective to share, I think you should definitely start your podcast. Like your perspective on how you see the world, your expertise, there is room for it in the world. And if you have a passion to share it, don't let anything stop you from sharing it.
So my belief is everyone has a platform, right? Everyone has a voice that should be amplified because we all have unique gifts, talents, experiences, education, something that there's someone in the world waiting, right, for it to be explained to them only the way you can do it. Does that have to be via podcasting? No. There are tons of platforms that you can choose from. There's still YouTube, there's still Periscope, there's still all these places. As long as you have some place to send your traffic back to so that people can experience you on a consistent basis, I really believe that that's the thing that matters. I don't think which platform matters as much as your consistency and your authenticity and you just showing up and being who you say you are, right? Adding great value and serving people. But everyone doesn't need to be everywhere. I just don't believe that. I think you need to shine wherever you shine. And once you find that place, go all in. Don't straddle the fence and give it everything you have. But podcasting, I don't believe is for everyone.
Yeah. Patrice, I completely agree. I think that a lot of the social media gurus out there, right, are trying to encourage people to show up everywhere on every platform. Like, you got to download TikTok. Like, you got to be on LinkedIn. You got to be on Facebook. You got to be on Twitter. It's like, oh my God, like you will have no time in the day to work on the actual thing that you do.
I cannot.
Yeah. If you're everywhere. So it's just crazy. And also, I want to notice this. I want to mention this. This hit me. Don't give me a call to action until you've enrolled me in the vision. Man, that was like, that was really good. So Patrice, thank you. Like, thank you. What can we do as a community to support you?
So one thing I'm really excited about during the pandemic, I really saw a lot of back and forth from folks about, is this the time that I should do this thing? Is this the time that I should launch the podcast or write the book or do whatever it is that God's put on your heart? And so I'm actually doing a free challenge next week called Created for Purpose. I believe each and every one of us has a call on our life, something that we are supposed to do during our time here. And I know that for me, building the brand of America's Money Maven was built in an uncertain time like this. I went from a 7-figure business to literally scraping up change in the recession. And so for me to start from the bottom and rebuild in a time when there was unemployment, I couldn't get a job to save my life. I mean, sleeping on my brother's couch in Atlanta for 3 months, driving one car 25 miles back and forth to drop my husband off and come back. Everything that could happen during that time happened. And yet I'm here. And yet I've built a credible platform with integrity. And so I want to teach more people how to do that, Paul. So there's a free challenge. It's at patricewashington.com/challenge. And I would love for some of you guys to join me. It's going to be fire.
Yeah, guarantee. I mean, it's guaranteed to be fire because you are the fire starter. That's exactly what you are, right? Patrice, once again, I really appreciate not just you showing up here, but I appreciate our friendship. I have a high level of respect for not only what you do, but how you do it. And so just keep making it happen, sis. Keep making it happen.
I appreciate it.
Everybody say goodbye to Patrice. There she goes. By the way, guys, I'm trying to be really good with holding to our time. Right. So I'm trying to be really good. So hopefully you're going to give me an applause today for holding to our time. When I say holding to our time, it's staying under an hour and 30 minutes. All right. So next up, I'm going to bring this lady on right here. And I want to say first, Caitlin, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You have inspired. You've held down the DMV. How can we all support you?
Well, we started Switch and Board to serve the DMV's podcasting needs because we noticed that the professional studios in the area have unattainable prices. So our goal is to create accessible podcasting for people at any tier. So to that end, we offer all levels of services to podcast planning, pre-production, post-production, editing, in-studio services, remote podcasting. And we moved into our brand new space in DuPont Circle right before the lockdown. And so we've been unable to show off all that our work has come to in DuPont. So we are so excited to open up as the lockdown lifts with contactless podcasting. So you can come here. It'll be a safe space. We are sanitizing everything. We have disposable mic covers. We have shields to separate you from guests so that it is a completely safe place. And we are so excited to show off what we've been working on. So to anyone who's listened to this, contact us, DM us, email us, call us, switchandboard.com, and you'll get 20% off any of our services.
Yeah. And I just want to underscore to everybody, because if you're showing up here, chances are you've been showing up to Better with Paul for the last maybe week, 2, 3, 10 weeks. I just want everybody to know that when I first decided to do a podcast, the first place I went to was Switching Board, right? So they will hold you down, right? They will hold you down. Matter of fact, I've recommended a lot of my friends to go there. Phenomenal. Caitlin, thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. This has been great.
And one of these days, Caitlin, we're going to get this podcast out the gate.
Yes, do it.
I know. Maybe. I tell you what, everybody real quick, yes or no in the comments, should I start my podcast? Yes or no, should I start my podcast? Yes or no? All right, guys. Caitlin, thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right. So that was Caitlin from Switching Board. Make sure that you hit them up, guys. And then last but not least, all right, I see a lot of yeses. Oh, look at all those no's I'm seeing coming from everybody saying no. No, everybody saying yes. I appreciate that. All right, last but not least, so my man, Paul. Paul, I'm going to have to call you Money Paul.
I like that. I like that one. Never had anything before, but so I like that one. I take it.
Money Paul. Thank you, man. Thank you for, I just think that what you brought to the table here was, to me, honestly, I feel less stress induced of having to reach a high number of downloads. Like that was like, I think I was fixated on that. But listening to you and Caitlin and Patrice, it sounds like, the number of downloads doesn't really matter, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So man, how can we support you?
Yeah, so I created a free guide. It's a launch roadmap for anybody who's thinking about starting, because what I did was, I hear a lot of questions from people who are thinking about starting, and they ask the same stuff about like, how do I grow? How do I not like start and get crickets? How do I monetize it? Like, what do I talk about? How do I do it in such a way that I'm not like burning myself out completely? And so I put all of those stuff in this guide to give you a roadmap of what you should be doing, what you should be looking out for as you go ahead to launch your podcast. So it's a free guide right there. And I think it'll be really helpful for you to starting out.
There you go. I encourage everybody to support Paul. Matter of fact, in it's weird for me to say in my new book, but in my new book, 57 Ways to Create New Sources of Income, Paul is in there. Paul's one of the folks that I recommend. So Paul, thank you, man. Thank you very much. Everybody say goodbye to Paul. There he goes. By the way, oh my gosh. You know what? I should have put this. Paul, hold on. You're still here. This is much better than Money Paul. Profit Paul.
Wow. Love that one. I love that one. Love that one more than Money Paul. Profit Paul. I take that. Yeah.
There you go. There's the profit. There he goes. The Profit Paul. All right. Good stuff, Paul. All right. We'll see you. All right. I love that. The Profit Paul. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's it for today. I like to do a temperature check. How was today, guys? How was today? Today was very helpful for me. It was. I feel as if I should do this. Like I was on the fence coming in, but now I'm in the fence, right? I'm in the fence. I'm thinking possibly, right? But long story short, there was a lot of information that was shared, different platforms that were discussed, kind of different workflows that were discussed, different ways to monetize. Make sure that you're on the newsletter. I'll recap everything in the newsletter, and any sites, resources, etc. that were mentioned. I'll make sure that I include that in the newsletter. So I want to make sure that I mention that. So join us there. Also, I want to make sure that I'm mentioning this so everybody knows we're going to Jamaica, y'all. We are going to Jamaica in 2021. Like literally, my wife Jill is already planning the karaoke, because she's all about karaoke, by the way. If you know me, you know my wife is all about karaoke. She's already planning the karaoke challenge, which will happen on the final night. And by the way, she normally wins the karaoke challenge. So she's going to take on all competitions. So she's ready. Groups are acceptable, by the way. She was asking me if I wanted to do some Rick James, Tina Marie with her. And I was like, I love Rick and Tina, but I'll just be drinking Red Stripes watching. But don't forget about Jamaica. And that is it. I want to wish everyone a phenomenal weekend, right? Want everybody to be safe. There's today, this whole week has felt heavy. Like, honestly, I've had a headache, massive headache. I've been watching the news, more than probably anyone should. But one thing I promise you is that you building a viable business is going to leapfrog not just you, but your family and your children's children, right? And that's the reason why I'm showing up. I feel like this is ministry now. My goal is to help as many people create viable, sustainable, strong businesses, strong brands. And that's why, that's why I'm showing up. That's why I'm so happy and I'm proud to do this for you all. So you guys have a great week. I'll see you on Monday. I'll see you all. By the way, big up, Tanisha. There you go. Nicola, I see you. Big up. My man, Ron. Ron already said, by the way, he's going to do all the photography in Jamaica. Ron, I saw you do that. Ruth, big up, sis. Kira, my man, Ricardo. Love you, bro. Love you. And Thornley Brown, she will be there, guys. She will be there, right? We'll all be in the house. Sebastian, Shannon, Renee, I can keep going. Tony. I'm going to end with my man, Tony. Tony's ready. All right, guys, I will see you. Take care. Have a phenomenal weekend.